Good afternoon, and I thank you for coming. It's wonderful to see all of you, and I expect that you probably have heard this from probably about everybody else that you visited with today. How happy we are to see you. And I think that it's probably quite likely that we are more happy to see you than you are to see us. Because of course, you must remember, you can visit people whenever you want to. And we haven't been up here for a really long time. I haven't been up for over 100 years, hard to believe, but it's quite true. So having this opportunity to visit with you is really special. And I want to welcome you to what I call my little hidden corner of the cemetery. And I think you might agree, it's kind of a little hidden gem in here. I have this beautiful monument, and I have this tree. It's always cool and shady. In the fall, this tree turns a brilliant red. In the fall, they don't plow in here, and the snow in the winter that drifts across the road. It's quiet, and it's really a lovely place to be laid to rest, if you want to be laid to rest. Now, I also want to tell you that there was a time just a few years ago when I was getting very worried. And in fact, some of my neighbors here were getting very worried too. Because for as long as the cemetery's been here, there was only woods over there. And all of a sudden, they started building houses. And we thought, uh-oh, there goes the end of peace and quiet. What are we in for? What kind of neighbors are we going to get? Well, I know there's a fellow named Jim Thompson that lives over there, and another one, Nick Delmonico, that lives in there, and we all got together and we thought, you know, we might have to get a petition up to see whether we can stop this or not. But we didn't do it, and I have to tell you that so far we haven't had any complaints at all. So I haven't stopped crossing my fingers, but I'm beginning to think that perhaps I can relax a little bit, and it's going to work out all right to have them through those woods, because I didn't want to have this disturbed. Now, I also want to show you this monument. I don't know if it's the second tallest or not, but it's one of the taller ones in the cemetery. Certainly not as tall as that grand black obelisk that belongs to the Honorable Mr. Pike. And have you met Mr. Pike already?
Yes.
Well, you know, he was quite a grand gentleman, and he has a monument to match. But this one is quite beautiful in its own way, made from red beach granite. And it also has these beautiful polished posts. But I want to tell you something. At one time, of course, there were chains that went across and formed a little enclosure. But here's something that you might know and you might not know. I find it very disturbing, and I hope it's not something that would be repeated at this particular time. But there was a time when things like this happened. Here, there was a beautiful gate. It was made of iron and had a tree on it. And that gate is gone. It was stolen. And not only was this gate stolen, but right down this part of the cemetery, and I'm sure you've met Mrs. Creamer, and you've talked to Miss Burns. Next to Miss Burns is another tall kind of white stone with black on it. That's the King lot, and I remember Gilman King. He was a shipbuilder down on the main street, and he had lots of money. And when the family died, they had a little iron Victorian bench. And it was a carved, it was metal, but it had leaves and grapes in a pattern that was open in the back. And the family would come and sit and mourn for the death of their loved ones. And that also was stolen. And these things would then appear in antique shops and be sold. So I'm hoping that that kind of thing is not something that would happen at this particular point in time. I hope that people are more aware now that it's not a good idea to steal these things out of the cemetery. But that's what happened to my gate, unfortunately. Well, I have an idea of what you might be thinking. I believe that when you look at this monument, that you're probably thinking that I was a person of some means, that probably I was the mayor of Calais, or I was a shipbuilder, or I was a lumber baron, or any other thing that might have made me a lot of money. But I must tell you that none of those things are true. That I was a very ordinary fellow, and I had no money at all. I worked in the mill. I lived in a very small house up in Milltown, my wife Mary and my family. We worked very hard to raise our children, but we had no money at all. And so I'm sure you're wondering, then where did this come from? Well, this monument is a testament to our children who had it put up at a later date after we died in our honor. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself and about my wife Mary. Even though we lived a very simple, ordinary life, we tried to live a good life and the best life that we could. We wanted to raise our children to be upright citizens. We wanted them to be good human beings, and we worked hard at it. We loved each other, and we loved our children. And in turn, our children loved us, as is seen by their desire to honor us with this grand obelisk as a monument. Now, I believed quite firmly, and still do, in the Golden Rule. We believed that you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so I always thought, is that something that I would want to have done to me before I would act, and hope that people would think in the same way. Now, I believe that my life was understood by people in Calais, because when I died, it was put in the advertiser that I was an upright man, one who did as he wanted to have done to him, one that was respected and generous and thought well of for both what was in his mind and in his heart. And I thought that that was a very kind and generous thing to have said. And although we could not say that we were prosperous and successful in a money sort of way, we were successful in other ways. My wife Mary was a very generous woman. In those days, of course, our circle of friends were other people that worked in the mill. And it was an easy thing for somebody to get hurt. And when they did, there was no way for them to get money to continue to feed their families. And if they were out of work for a while, then other people had to try to help. And so my wife Mary always, even though we didn't have a lot of money, she would always try to bake an extra loaf of bread and take it to the person next door if they were out of work, or anything of that sort, anything that would help some of our friends and our neighbors. And that's the sort of life that we lived. And we were happy and lived this life that was really devoted to raising our children. Now, that's not to say that we only had happy times and that everything went really well, because it didn't. And you might be aware that at the time that I was living, it was a very common thing. People had a lot of children, but they also lost children. Excuse me. And so my wife and I had 5 children. Now, in 1848, my wife had a son, George, and then in 1849, we had another son, or I've got it backwards actually. George was born in 1849, and Benjamin was born in 1848. Poor George didn't even live a year. He was born in January, and he died in September. And little Benji was just a little bit short of his 5th birthday when he left us. But we were grateful for the 3 children that we did have, and we thank God that those 3 children were able to grow to adulthood. Now, losing children is a very, very difficult thing. It was very, very hard on Mary to lose these children, and it was hard on me too, but I really think it was harder on Mary, because I'm sure you all know that losing children is an unnatural feeling thing. You always think you'll live longer than your children do, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. For me, the most difficult thing was when I lost Mary herself. And Mary died in July of 1879. And I shall be very honest with you now. I truly believe that my heart would break. We'd been together forever. We'd raised our children. They were off on their own now, and they were just the two of us. And I didn't know what I would do, how I would go on. It got to be September, and I wasn't feeling any better. And so my son Joe said, "Dad, I think that you should leave Calais for the winter and come to Pennsylvania and stay with me." And so I did. I went down to Pennsylvania, and I have to give you another little piece of information. I don't know if you've noticed my suit. Well, when I was living here in Calais, of course, I have to be honest, I didn't ever have a suit as grand as this. This is really a gentleman's suit. And I'll tell you where I got it. As soon as I got to Philadelphia, my son Joe said, "Dad, we're going to be going places, and you've got to have a suit that's proper for Philadelphia." And he took me there to one of the good tailors and had this suit made. And so that's where this came from. And I haven't had too much opportunity to wear it. I told the other group, I'm not sure if you look real close, you might still find the tags on it somewhere. Because by the time Christmas came, I had died as well. And I truly believe that I did die of a broken heart from the loss of Mary. Well, years went by, probably 25 or more, and during that time, my two boys, Joe and Jimmy, began to be more prosperous themselves. And that's when they decided, along with their sister, that they wanted to do something to honor the memory of myself and my wife Mary. And the first thing they did was to erect this monument. But they wanted to do more than that. They decided that perhaps it would be a good idea if they gave some money to the church. Now, we'd always gone to St. Anne's Church. We didn't have a horse and carriage. We walked to church from Milltown. We couldn't afford to keep a horse. That was how it was. And in fact, I have to tell you, I saw this little thing down there. You see that? I'm not sure what it is, but it moves. It really does move. I saw it. Move. I don't know how it moves. It makes kind of a noise, but there isn't a horse or anything. And my boys got together, and they had $3,000. And the $3,000 doesn't probably sound like a lot of money to you, but I was wondering, I don't have the $3,000, but could I get that for $3,000? I was kind of hoping I could. I don't know where my boys are, but I might still be able to find them. Well, anyway, they came to Calais, and they met with the Reverend Moore at St. Anne's Church, and they said they had $3,000. Well, the church evidently was in some need at that time, and so I'm sure that this money was heaven sent. And I want to tell you what they did with the $3,000, and perhaps that will help you understand how $3,000 was a lot more money than perhaps it might seem to you today. First of all, St. Anne's Church had been built about 50 years before, and not a lot of maintenance had been done, and so it needed a new roof. So the first thing they did with the $3,000 was to put a new roof on the whole church. Then there was a hall, but the hall was separate. It wasn't connected to the church at all. It was just a separate standing building. And so the $3,000 also built an addition that connected the back of the hall and added a kitchen and connected to the church. Then the Reverend Moore thought the church needed to be refurbished. Now, I'm not sure that it seemed perfectly good to me, and it was an original James Renwick interior. You know, James Renwick was the architect for that church, and he also built St. Patrick's Cathedral, and he built the Smithsonian, And I thought, well, gee, you know, it was a lovely interior, but I don't know what might have happened in the interim, the time that I left. But anyway, it needed refurbishing, according to Reverend Moore, and so, as I said, they put on a new roof. They added to the parish hall. They put in a new floor. They put in all new pews, and they decided to rebuild the front of the church where the altar was, to redo the sanctuary so that it looked completely different. They put in a new altar, all carved with a green marble top. And the original window that was up above the altar was very long. It was exactly like the one that was on the other end of the church, on the Church Street side. And so they decided to put in a stained glass window. And all those things were done with the $3,000. Now, one of the things that my children wanted was to put my name and Mary's name in front of people for as long as possible so that we wouldn't be forgotten. And the window is where they did it. So if you were to go to St. Anne's Church, underneath the beautiful stained glass window that shows Jesus preaching to the people, it says, in memory of James and Mary Cochran, by their children, and gives the dates. And I'd like you to do something for me. If you ever have an opportunity to go into St. Anne's Church, I want you please to take a moment and look at that window and look at what it says underneath, in memory of James and Mary Cochran. And I want you to think of this visit with me here today. And remember that that window is a testament to the love of parents for their children and children for their parents. Now, I really must be going. I know that I have another group coming. In fact, they will be here before long. And you have to visit with Mrs. Wilder, who is sitting up there waiting for you. She has a lot of interesting information, I must say. And I'm sure that, well, if you've been to Mr. Cortell, have you been to Mr. Cortell? Yes, I'm sure he always mentions that there's a party. Did he say that? Well, there's always a party. And tonight's a little different because down here, Mrs. Creamer, now I don't know Mrs. Creamer because she came after I was gone. But I understand she's a crackerjack piano. You know, your guess is as good as mine where this piano's coming from. I don't know. But there's going to be a piano, and there's going to be a party. And I'm going to be there, and Mary's coming too. So, I must get ready. Thank you for coming. No. Oh, I don't know.